Chapter 1342. Inside the Black Abyss, meteorites flew in all directions. The people of the three tribes gathered again and waited silently. The eighth spirit ball was born. Almost at the same time, the cultivators of the three tribes all rushed in the direction of the spirit ball. This time, the location where the spiritual orb appeared was closer to the western camp, so the 9 people from the western camp were the first to arrive. But just as Lu Yi had expected, they didn't choose to transport the spiritual orb to their own camp. Instead, they headed to the southern camp. When the 9 people from the southern camp arrived, the two sides gathered together, chatting and laughing with each other, the atmosphere relaxed and happy. Lu Yi led his own people and followed them from a distance of 100 miles, looking like he wasn't willing to give up and was ready to snatch the spirit ball at any time. In such a situation, the southern and western camps could only unite tightly, not daring to be careless. It wasn't until the two tribes had sent the spirit ball halfway that Lu Yi stopped and didn't pursue. In his perception, the 8th spirit ball was quickly and unwaveringly approaching the southern camp. For hours later, everything was settled down. What followed was another long wait. The location of the spirit ball wasn't fixed, generally appearing in the center of the Black Abyss, and the timing of its appearance was completely disordered. No one knew when the next spirit ball would appear. In the past, there was even a precedent of a maximum of 3 spirit balls appearing at a time. This time, the wait was a bit longer. After a full day, the 9th spirit ball was finally born. When the strange energy fluctuations spread out, the cultivators of the southern and western tribes were like sharks that had smelled blood. They all rushed over. The people of the eastern camp also flew in the same direction under Lu Ye's lead. Just like the last time, he followed the two groups of people from afar, watching them transport the spirit balls with a huff and puff. Duan Xiuqun and Yi Chaochuan were a little puzzled, because the two tribes had already sincerely joined hands. With such a huge gap in strength between them, why was the eastern camp so stubborn? If they were in the eastern camp's position, they wouldn't be doing such useless things at this time, but rather strengthening the defenses of their own camp to ensure that the 3 spirit balls they had already obtained were not lost. They didn't talk much with Lu Yi, but they could see that the foreign aide invited by the eastern camp wasn't an idiot. They always felt that this guy was secretly plotting something, but they didn't know what it was specifically. The two of them secretly communicated while transporting the spirit orbs. After a while, Duan Xiuqun was suddenly stunned. Where are the others in the east? It was unknown when, but of the 9 people from the east, only Lu Yi was left. The others were nowhere to be seen. When he looked again, he saw a meteorite streaking past Lu Yi, and Lu Yi had disappeared without a trace. It was also at this moment that an uproar broke out in the misty space. At their level of cultivation, they would rarely be moved by external things. Take Chen Xianhai and Wu Qima for example. Even if they had noticed the change in Su Yuqing before, they would not have reacted like this unless there was something that surprised them. The scene that they were witnessing right now was simply too strange. From what he could see, the 18 constellations of the southern and western tribes were gathered together. There was also a dot of light that represented the spirit ball. This undoubtedly meant that the two tribes were working together to transport the spirit ball. However, the cultivators from the eastern region that were originally near the two tribes had split up and were approaching the two tribes at an unimaginable speed. It wasn't flying but rather leaping forward. There were 9 people in the east, but at this moment, there were 10 light spots. They were divided into 2 waves. After pausing at one place for a while, they suddenly moved to the next place. Judging from the distance they had jumped, they had crossed at least 10,000 miles. They were approaching the camps of the southern and western tribes in a straight line without any deviation. Is this a teleportation talisman? Ri Zhao from the west exclaimed in surprise. Zhu Lauer from the south asked in a serious tone, "Does your family have such a teleportation talisman?" The dwarf race could make teleportation talismans, but it was impossible for them to have such an effect. This was because the teleportation talismans made by the dwarf race could not be used to control the direction of the teleportation. In other words, the teleportation talisman would randomly teleport to a certain location. Moreover, the teleportation distance was limited. Only a teleportation talisman made by a sunshine cultivator had the power to teleport 10,000 miles. Most importantly, the two tribes in the east were clearly heading toward the camps of the other two tribes without any deviation. This was not something a teleportation talisman could do. If it was not a teleportation talisman, then it had to be a teleportation formation. Only a teleportation formation could achieve such an effect. The group of Rizhao finally understood the purpose of the 28th light. Strange behavior. Back when they were fighting for the 6th spiritual ball, the 3 cultivators in the west had died. When they returned to the camp, this strange 28th light that had made a trip to the southern and western tribes respectively. At that time, the Rizhao did not know what his purpose was. It was only now that they understood. This guy actually set up a teleportation formation along the way. This meant that this person had already set his sights on the two tribes at that time. What kind of foresight was this? However, there was one thing that the Rizhao did not understand. Because in their previous observation, the 28th light. Did not stop along the way. Where did he find the time to set up a teleportation formation? It was also unrealistic to rely on a teleportation talisman. The teleportation talismans made by the dwarf race were made in pairs. They could teleport from one point to another, but it was impossible to teleport continuously. Moreover, ordinary teleportation talismans could not teleport so many people. In addition, there were large and small meteorites flying around in the black abyss. If a teleportation talisman was set up in advance, there was no guarantee that the talisman would not be destroyed by the meteorites. "Brother Qin, your little brat, what's going on?" Zhu Lauer could not help but ask. Not only did he use some unknown method to mark the 28th light. In the mysterious fog space, but now he even used such a wonderful method. Was this something that a star constellation could do? Qin Xianhai did not speak. "You ask me, but who should I ask?" Since Lu Yi came to Mount Fengsuan, he had only seen him once. He did not know Lu Ye's background at all. The only thing he knew now was that Lu Ye's joining was brought about by Su Yuqing's great sacrifice. When he noticed this at that time, he thought Su Yuqing was too hardworking. But now it seemed that she had a unique insight. When he saw the southern and western tribes joining forces, Chen Xianhai knew that his side was in big trouble. They might even be last in this martial arts competition. But now it seemed that the key to turning the tables was this foreign aid. Right now, it was not his side that was in big trouble, but the other two tribes. Suddenly, the two groups of people from the eastern tribes rushed to the two camps. The southern tribes had 3 spirit balls quietly placed on the platform, while the western tribes had 2 spirit balls, each of which was protected by a spirit array. Although the spirit array set up by the humanoid tribe with the help of spirit talismans was not bad, a spirit array without anyone controlling it was ultimately a dead spirit array. The power it could exert was limited. When the eastern tribes set up the spirit array, Lu Yi had carefully observed it. This kind of defense was actually not very effective. As long as there was a strong enough attack, the spirit array could be broken. Not to mention, when it came to breaking spirit arrays, he had unique experience. As early as in the Spirit Stream battlefield, the core circle's top sects had been poisoned by this spirit array. That was how he gained the title of Sect Destroyer Yi. At the two camps, the people from the eastern tribes, under the leadership of Lu Yi and his doppelganger, used their own methods to break the spirit arrays. Everyone was full of enthusiasm. The feeling of doing something sneaky was really exciting. In just 1 incense stick's worth of time, the spirit arrays of the two camps were all broken. Everyone found meteorites of suitable size and placed them behind the spirit orbs. Then, they laughed and laughed as they pushed the meteorites to move the spirit orbs. Because the spirit orbs had the characteristic of not moving unless they were pushed, they had to rely on the meteorites to move the spirit orbs. This was to ensure that the spirit orbs would continue to move after the eastern tribes retreated. For safety's sake, the 3 spirit orbs in the southern tribes and the 2 spirit orbs in the western tribes were pushed in different directions. As a result, if the southern tribes and the western tribes wanted to retrieve the spirit orbs, they would have to waste a lot of time. Lu Yi had never thought of robbing the spirit orbs of the two tribes. It was unrealistic because once he made a move, the two tribes would definitely react quickly and come back to help. Now that the eastern tribes had split into two groups, they would not be a match for either of them. Lu Ye's goal from the beginning was the 9th spirit orb. That was when the spirit orbs of the two tribes began to move. The cultivators of the other two tribes who were transporting the spirit orbs to the western tribes were startled. Duan Xiuchen frowned and said, "Brother Yi, I don't know if I'm wrong, but why do I feel like my spirit orbs are moving?" Yi Chaochuan's expression was solemn. "I have the same feeling." Looking at the others, they all nodded in agreement. "This is bad, it must be the eastern tribes." Duan Xiuchen turned pale with fright. Just now, he had been searching for traces of the eastern tribes with Yi Chaochuan, but ever since Lu Yi disappeared, the eastern tribes had not appeared. They had thought that the eastern tribes knew that they were no match for the eastern tribes and had accepted their fate and returned to the eastern tribes. But now, it seemed that the eastern tribes had actually gone to steal from them. For a moment, they couldn't understand how they had done it. Only a few dozen breaths had passed since the eastern tribes had disappeared. How could the eastern tribes have such a method to travel such a long distance in such a short time? Realizing that the eastern tribes were in a bad situation, Duan Xiuchen decisively shouted, "Return to help, quickly return to help." Hearing this, the southern tribes' cultivators immediately turned around and flew back to their tribes' camps. Duan Xiuchen shouted again, "Idiots, all of you die." This place was so far away from their tribes' camps. If they really wanted to fly back, it would be too late. If they wanted to return to their tribes' camps as soon as possible, they would have to die. As for the spiritual power consumed by rebirth, at a time like this, who would care about such minor details? Everyone seemed to have woken up from a dream and used their methods to kill themselves on the spot. In the blink of an eye, the 9 southern tribes' cultivators had died cleanly. End of chapter. Chapter 1343. Yi Chaochuan felt terrible. The southern side could easily retreat because this spirit ball was destined for the western camp. Compared to assisting their allies, they naturally cared more about the results of their own camp. But what about the western side? If they all died and returned, would they still want the 9th spirit ball? But if only a portion of them died and returned, what could they do against the man-eating insects of the east? He was a decisive person. He immediately called out 2 names and ordered, "You 2 continue to transport the spirit balls. Everyone else, die and return." Everyone obeyed without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, there were only 2 early-stage constellation cultivators left. The 2 of them looked at each other and felt helpless. The originally lively scene suddenly became cold and cheerless, and they could only continue to transport the spirit balls while huffing and puffing. But this leisurely atmosphere was quickly broken, because in their senses, they sensed the aura of constellation cultivators rapidly approaching in this direction. Looking up, they saw many streaks of light coming from that direction. The people from the east were here. There were 9 of them, not a single one left. What was going on? The 2 early-stage constellation cultivators guarding the western side were stunned. If the people stealing from the southern and western camps were from the east, then what was going on in front of them? Not only were they stunned, Duan Xiuchen and Yi Chaochuan, who had died and returned to their own camp, were also stunned. Because in their field of vision, there was not a single trace of the eastern cultivators. They could not even sense any aura. The eastern cultivators did not seem to have come at all. However, it was impossible for the defensive array formation they had set up to shatter for no reason. It was clear that it had been attacked by someone. Furthermore, the spirit balls had scattered in all directions. Behind each of the spirit balls, there was a huge meteorite pushing them. Shameless! In the misty space, Ri Zhao of the southern side was furious. He accused Chen Xianhai, "This is blatant shamelessness." Ri Zhao of the western side was stunned for a moment before he reacted, "That's right, that's right. How is this a constellation cultivator's method? What kind of treasure did you prepare for these brats? It actually has the power to appear and disappear unpredictably." Chen Xianhai frowned. "Although our eastern side has been declining for years, we will not break the rules left behind by our ancestors. Moreover, you are also Ri Zhao. In your opinion, What kind of treasure can have such an effect? I think you can't afford to lose. But how do you explain this kind of teleportation technique? What do I need to explain? You guys are acting shamelessly. King cheat. Is the rise of the Eastern region a shameless act? Should your Southern and Western divisions be strong all year round, while my Eastern division will always be weak? A group of people who were highly respected in front of the disciples, the pillars of this world, at this moment, were quarreling like children in this strange foggy space. They were constantly making noise, and their mouths were constantly spewing out obscenities. If the disciples of other worlds were to see this, they would most likely change their understanding of the world. Amidst the commotion, the blue dots representing the two cultivators in the west were annihilated. This undoubtedly meant that the two cultivators had died in battle. Next to the ninth spirit ball, only the red dots representing the eastern cultivators were left. They gathered around the spirit ball and flew towards the eastern camp. Judging from the current state of the southern and western divisions, they were simply unable to stop them, nor did they have the time to stop them. The eastern side would definitely win the fourth spirit ball. In fact, Rizhao of the southern and western divisions also knew that the eastern side would not act shamelessly in a martial arts exercise. Otherwise, they would not have been at the bottom every time. However, this time, the two divisions had brought out an extremely powerful lineup. If placed in the past martial arts exercises, they would definitely win first place. On the other hand, the eastern side had such a weak 9 people. If they won first place, the southern and western divisions would lose face. Amidst the commotion, the oldest Rizhao of the western side slowly opened his mouth. Stop arguing. The moral quality of the fellow Taoists of the eastern side should not be doubted. The Black Abyss martial arts exercise is a major event held once every 50 years. No one will secretly play any unfair tricks. We should be happy for these little bastards of the eastern side to have such a performance. He was the oldest, and it could be said that he had watched the Rizhao grow up. As soon as he opened his mouth, the quarrel stopped. Zhu Lauer nodded and said, "Elder Su is right. We did not have enough self-respect." Elder Su changed the topic and said leisurely, "However, there is still some time before the end of the martial arts exercise. Winning the spirit ball is not the end. We have to be able to defend it." As soon as he said this, Qin Xianhai could not help but sigh. However, the eyes of the other two Rizhao lit up. Indeed, winning the spirit ball was not the end. They had to be able to defend it until the end of the martial arts exercise. The current situation in the Black Abyss was very clear. The eastern side would get the 4th spirit ball, the southern side 3, and the western side 2. Not to mention the southern side, for the western side, which was the strongest on the surface, such a result was absolutely unacceptable. Therefore, no matter what, they would attack the camp. The southern side would definitely not be a bystander. They would probably want to go one step further. Now that the western side only had 2 spirit balls, they could only deal with the eastern side. Therefore, the following situation would most likely be the southern and western sides would continue to cooperate sincerely and attack the eastern camp. This was undoubtedly an extremely severe test for the eastern side. If they could defend it, they would be able to wash away their previous shame. If they could not, all their previous efforts would be in vain. As for what the final result would be, even the Rizhao present could not easily predict it. On the surface, the eastern side did not have the strength to defend the spirit ball. However, the performance of the eastern cultivators this time was really strange, so no one could make a conclusion easily. In the Black Abyss, in the eastern camp, the 4th spirit ball was safely sent back. They did not encounter any obstacles along the way. It was unimaginably easy. Cheers sounded. The male cultivators were excited, and the more meticulous female cultivators almost had tears in their eyes. No one thought that they would really do it. They did what their ancestors had always hoped for but could not do. When Lu Yi decided to snatch the 4th spirit ball, no one thought that he would succeed. After all, the cooperation of the other 2 divisions was so close. Their side was the weakest, and they had to fight 1 against 2. How could they succeed? However, they never expected that under Lu Ye's meticulous planning, the seemingly impossible task would be easily accomplished. Throughout the entire process, they only followed orders, constantly changing their positions. Apart from killing 2 Western cultivators in the end, they didn't encounter the main forces of the other 2 tribes at all. What a marvelous skill! Don't be so happy. Lu Yi interrupted everyone's cheers. The real test has just begun. The southern and western divisions will definitely not give up. They must be on their way. Right now, we must defend the camp and delay until the end of the martial arts practice. Haitang nodded. Junior brother Lu is right. There are about 2 days until the end of the martial arts practice. We can only win if we survive these 2 days. Han Malong said, Senior brother Lu, just tell us what to do. We will just follow your orders. Everyone nodded. In the beginning, the leader in everyone's mind was Haitang, but as they fought for the spirit balls, Lu Yi had become the backbone of the eastern side. Especially after the 4th spirit ball, even if Lu Yi told them to die now, no one would frown. They would only think about whether there was a deeper meaning to his words. Then, let's recover our spiritual power first, Lu Yi said. Everyone was stunned. They thought that there would be some serious task waiting for them. Who knew that it would be so simple? No one asked any more questions. They all sat down cross-legged and silently recovered. Haitang secretly transmitted her voice to Lu Yi. Junior brother Lu, there seems to be some changes in the formation here. Did you do it? Lu Yi nodded. I've added some defensive formations. Haitang said, Junior brother, do you have a clone? Lu Yi smiled. Senior sister, you can tell? Haitang said, when you led us to the western camp, Junior brother's clothes were a little different. Also, you didn't have a saber, so I think it might be a clone. However, Junior brother's clone technique is really mysterious. I can't see any flaws. The clone technique I cultivate is a little special, Lu Yi explained casually. Strictly speaking, it was not a clone technique. It was an ability that belonged to Lu Yi based on his talent tree. However, its appearance was similar to a clone technique. In the eyes of those who did not know, it was indeed impossible to see any flaws. After chatting for a while, Haitang also began to recover. The eastern camp was quiet. In the void 1,000 li away, Duan Xiuchen was waiting with the southern camp. A moment later, the western camp rushed over under Yi Chaochuan's lead. When they saw each other, they could see the bitterness in each other's eyes. No one expected that the alliance of the 2 camps would be so easily resolved by the eastern camp. They originally thought that after the 6th spiritual ball, the eastern camp would not be able to interfere with the remaining spiritual balls. Not only would they not be able to interfere, they might not even be able to keep the spiritual balls they had already obtained. Who would have thought that the 9th spiritual ball would end up in the eastern camp's hands? After a while, Duan Xiuchen said, look on the bright side. The situation hasn't changed that much. The 2 camps had originally planned to attack the eastern camp after transporting the 9th spiritual ball. Now they were still here. However, the current situation was advantageous for the southern camp. Because the spiritual balls that were supposed to be sent to the western camp were lost, the southern camp did not suffer any losses. Yi Chaochuan said, Brother Duan, if the southern camp wants to take first place this time, you can't hold back. The western camp was already standing at the edge of a cliff. They only had 2 spiritual balls in hand. If they did not take one back, they would not be able to explain themselves. They could not hope for first place. They could only hope for second place. Thus, they still needed the southern camp to work together. If everything went smoothly, they would be able to snatch 2 spiritual balls from the eastern camp. Both sides would have one each. That would be a happy ending. As for the eastern camp, let them cry. Duan Xiuchen naturally knew what Yi Chaochuan was thinking. He smiled and nodded. Don't worry. The southern camp does not want to miss such a good opportunity. It was rare that the western camp did not fight with them for first place. How could the southern camp not grasp this opportunity? End of chapter. Chapter 1344. They're here. Amidst the silent wait, Han Malong's voice suddenly rang out. In the eastern camp, everyone who was hurrying to recover looked up. Sure enough, they saw a large mass of flowing light rapidly approaching. The southern and western divisions, the 18 constellations, their figures open and without any concealment. In reality, there was nothing they could hide. In this kind of situation, in this kind of environment, there was no room for any schemes. If they wanted to forcefully attack the eastern camp, they would have to rely on the true strength of the two divisions. When they were only 3 li away from the eastern camp platform, the cultivators of the two divisions stopped. Yi Chaochuan and Duan Xiuqun stood side by side, their gazes complicated as they looked forward. The 4 properly placed spirit balls were so dazzling at this moment. This kind of situation should have occurred in their 2 camps, but now it had occurred in the eastern camp. Even now, they still didn't know what method the eastern side used to break through their camp's defenses and push away the spirit balls. They wanted to ask, but they probably wouldn't get any results, so they gave up. Yi Chaochuan sighed softly. His spirit sense surged and his voice spread in all directions. Fellow Taoists of the eastern camp, we have learned from this time. However, this matter concerns the foundation of our domain for the next 50 years. I ask for everyone's understanding. Our southern and western divisions have joined forces to attack. Don't say that we have an unfair advantage. Using such a lineup to deal with the seemingly weakest eastern camp was somewhat unreasonable. However, the eastern camp's behavior this time was too strange. They had no choice but to do this. Since things had reached this point, they could only say some polite words. Although he was speaking to everyone in the eastern camp, Yi Chaochuan's gaze was fixed on Lu Yi. Because he had a feeling that the strange things happening in the eastern camp this time were related to this human. Although the humanoid race was divided into 3 divisions, they were still one race. Everyone knew what kind of abilities they had. If there was a method beyond their knowledge, then it must be done by an outsider. Meeting his gaze, Lu Ye's expression was indifferent. Bring it on. Yi Chaochuan nodded and waved his hand lightly. A word jumped out of his mouth. Kill. The 18 figures instantly split into several waves. From different directions, they surrounded the eastern camp. In the next instant, multicolored lights began to bloom, bombarding the eastern camp. As soon as the cultivators from the 2 tribes arrived, the eastern side had already made preparations for battle. 9 silhouettes were scattered on the smooth platform, each occupying a large array core. They poured their spiritual energy into the array and activated its power. In a split second, the surface of the platform lit up layer after layer of light screens, completely surrounding the entire camp and the spirit balls placed within. These layers of defensive formations appeared to be independent of each other, but in reality, there were some close connections between them. Now that there were people presiding over them, the power they could display was not to be underestimated. It was not something that the formations of the southern and western camps could compare to. At that time, there was no one presiding over the 2 camps, so it was a dead formation. But now, the formations in the eastern camp were alive, so the difference in their defensive capabilities was at least 4 to 5 times. One after another, sharp attacks landed on the light screen, causing ripples to appear on the light screen, causing it to flicker. In such a clear battle between offense and defense, if the attacking side did not have an explosive method to break the formation in a short period of time, then the test of both sides was a battle of patience and the endurance of their spiritual energy. The southern and western camps clearly knew that in the face of such an impenetrable defense like the eastern camp, they would not be able to see results in a short period of time. So while their attacks appeared fierce, they were actually controlling the consumption of their spiritual energy rhythmically. Their expressions were neither fast nor slow. The situation seemed to be in a stalemate, but in reality, it was slowly developing in a direction that was advantageous to the southern and western camps. After all, no matter how sturdy the defenses were, there would be a time when they would be broken. Especially when the difference in strength between the 2 sides was like this. In a battle like this, the defending side would always be in a passive and disadvantageous position. After a full 4 hours of fierce fighting, the first layer of the eastern camp's defenses was broken. In another 4 hours, the second layer of defenses was broken. In another 3 hours, the third layer of defenses was broken. There were 9 layers of defenses, but not all of them could last for the same amount of time. Instead, the further they went, the shorter the time they could last. by the time they reached the last layer, they might not even last for an incense stick's worth of time. Lu Ye's expression was calm, not surprised by this. In fact, the fact that the eastern camp's first layer of defenses could last for so long was already unexpected. It was mainly because the cultivators of the southern and western camps were afraid that excessive spiritual energy consumption would affect their subsequent performance. Hai Tang was secretly anxious, but there was nothing she could do. The current situation was actually very suitable for the dwarf race to activate the formation talisman, but there were also offensive and defensive talismans. She had a 9-chain curve formation talisman given to her by her master, which was an offensive talisman and was not suitable to use at this time. After all, as the defending side, stalling for time was fundamental. It was impossible for them to casually take the initiative to attack. The reason why Su Yuqing gave them this offensive talisman was because the eastern camp had always been weak. With the help of this talisman, they might be able to turn defeat into victory at some key points. Who would have thought that the eastern camp, which had always been at the bottom, would have such a big explosion this time that they actually needed to defend? Things were developing in the direction Lu Yi expected. In the camp, layers of defenses were broken one after another, and the time each layer could last was getting shorter and shorter. But even so, the attacks of the southern and western camps' cultivators did not change at all, and they did not appear to be anxious. From their point of view, breaking the eastern camp's defensive formation was not a victory. They still had to go through an even more bloody and fierce battle, killing the eastern camp's cultivators until they could not fight back. Only then could they successfully snatch the spirit orb. As long as the eastern camp still had some strength left, they would not be able to succeed. Therefore, breaking the defenses was not the end, but the beginning of another. Less than a day later, the eastern camp's last layer of defenses was completely broken. Attacks like raindrops fell on the eastern camp's defenseless camp. Even though the eastern camp's cultivators tried their best to dodge, it was inevitable that some of them would be hit. In an instant, the eastern camp had a few more injured people. Lu Yi was the focus of attention. Yi Chaochuan and Duan Xiuchen, the two late-stage constellation masters, each used their own methods to attack from afar. Their attacks were like the stars and moon, endless and unending. Lu Ye's figure moved freely, dodging with difficulty. But as the defensive side, he could not easily take the initiative to attack. Because once he killed his way out, the remaining eastern camp's cultivators could only become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. The southern and western camps would definitely swarm over and kill them all. After dodging with all his might for a while, he saw that the two camps had no intention of attacking him, only attacking from afar. Lu Yi sighed inwardly. Yi Chaochuan and Duan Xiuchen were still very dependable. They were clearly relying on their advantage in numbers and overall strength to suppress the eastern camp. Perhaps it was also related to his identity as a weapon cultivator. Although the humanoid race did not have a particularly strict division of factions, they also knew that when dealing with weapon cultivators, they should not fight in their areas of expertise and not give them a chance to get close. This kind of long-distance suppression was the most troublesome thing for weapon cultivators. He could not wait any longer. Lu Yi originally wanted to wait for the two camps' cultivators to come closer to give them a surprise, but now that this plan was ruined, he could only use his own methods. The instant the blood-red light bloomed, the sound of surging waves could be faintly heard, as if they were suddenly placed in the middle of a stormy sea. In the next instant, the blood-red light spread outwards with a bang, rapidly spreading out. Seeing this, Duan Xiuchen's expression changed, and he hurriedly shouted, "Retreat!" The reaction of the cultivators from the two tribes was also extremely fast. Seeing that the situation was not good, they all retreated. However, the speed at which the blood light spread was too fast, and there were no signs of it erupting. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a huge blood ball. Duan Xiuchen, who had retreated to a safe distance, looked over. He could no longer see any traces of the eastern camp. Even the 4 spiritual balls that were placed there were tightly wrapped by the blood sphere. There were also 3 cultivators from the south who had gone missing. Duan Xiuchen's expression sank. Naturally, he knew that the missing southern cultivators must have already fallen into this strange blood sphere. Looking at the western camp, the situation was also not good. 2 people were missing. Although they had one less person than their own side, one of the 2 missing people was a mid-stage constellation cultivator. A formation of 18 people suddenly lost 5 people. Even if it was not a serious injury, it was still a heavy loss. Fortunately, the 2 late-stage constellation cultivators were safe and sound. Otherwise, it would be a huge problem. This is a blood Dao secret art? Duan Xiuchen sized up the blood sphere in front of him in confusion. It looks very similar to the blood arts of the vampires. It must be a blood Dao secret art. Yi Chaochuan nodded and turned to look at one of the early-stage constellation cultivators. The 3 of you were trapped by this thing before? This early-stage constellation cultivator was one of the unlucky ones who had been cast by Lu Ye's blood art. That early-stage constellation cultivator gritted his teeth and nodded. That's right. This blood Dao secret art is almost exactly the same as the blood arts recorded in the ancient records. It's impossible to escape once trapped. Back then, in order to escape, the 3 of them had no choice but to commit suicide. Now that he saw this blood sphere again, he couldn't help but feel hatred. This is troublesome. Duan Xiuchen frowned. He originally thought that breaking through the eastern camp's defenses would be the toughest thing to do. Who would have thought that the other side could cast such a blood Dao secret art? Moreover, his side didn't notice and lost 5 people in an instant. Yi Chaochuan said sternly, "It's not troublesome. There's only 1 day left in the martial arts exhibition. We can only force our way through. Such a massive blood art will definitely exhaust him greatly. I don't believe he can keep it up forever." Duan Xiuchen clearly understood this principle. Speaking of which, the humans had a rather thorough understanding of the vampires' blood arts due to their history. Even though they had never seen it before, they knew what was most beneficial to them at this moment. After a brief discussion, the remaining 13 people of the 2 divisions attacked once more. Compared to before, their attacks were undoubtedly more ferocious this time. That was to be expected. What they had attacked just now was the eastern camp's defensive formation. They didn't need to be too ferocious and only needed to wear it down slowly. However, their current attack was a type of blood Dao secret art. It was activated with the power of a single person. The more ferocious the attack, the more it would exhaust the other party until they couldn't hold on anymore. End of this chapter. Chapter 1345. Many attacks hit the blood ball, and the blood in the blood ball surged. It didn't seem to have much effect, but everyone in the hominid tribe knew that this kind of attack would consume a lot of energy for the caster of the blood way secret technique. Once the caster couldn't maintain it, they could go straight to the root of the problem. Inside the blood ball, the 5 trapped cultivators were also using their own methods, especially the middle stage constellation cultivator. His attacks were the fiercest, almost without holding back, because he knew that he would be doomed if he fell into such a predicament. Before he died, of course, he had to exert his greatest ability to weaken the enemy's strength. His idea was right, but in just a moment, a figure appeared behind him like a ghost and slashed out with a long saber, not giving him any time to react at all, and he was beheaded. At the same time, in the other 4 positions of the Blood Sea, under the secret guidance of Lu Yi, the eastern cultivators cooperated in pairs and began to besiege the fallen enemies. The battle broke out quickly and ended quickly. After a few breaths, it was calm again. Following the guidance of Lu Yi, the 8 people returned to the platform of the camp again. At the same time, they sat down cross-legged and began to take out spirit jades to restore themselves. But soon everyone noticed that something was wrong, because in such an environment, the efficiency of recovery was many times faster than usual. Not only was the power of their own refining of spirit jades pouring into their bodies, but there was also a source of power from the blood sea around them that they couldn't detect, constantly pouring into their bodies to replenish their consumption. Most people didn't know what was going on, but Huang Li and Su Xinghe, who had been following Lu Yi, knew that this was Lu Ye's doing. They had had such an experience before. Since following Lu Yi and relying on the twin qi-connected spirit array disc, they had never had to worry about their spirit qi running out, because the spirit qi reserves in their bodies were basically always in a full state. The 2 of them didn't know that this time, Lu Yi didn't rely on the twin chi-linked array disk, but the twin chi-linked spiritual rune. After all, the range that the array disk could cover was limited, but in the Blood Sea, Lu Yi could completely construct a twin chi-linked spiritual rune that covered everyone. At this time, the roots of the talent tree were piled up under his feet, and the roots of the talent tree pierced into them, madly swallowing them, replenishing his own consumption, and also helping Haitang and the others to recover. Not only that, but he also took out the monster cores of the anglerfish star beasts he had killed before, chewed and swallowed them. The people in the east were unaware of the dangers outside, but Lu Yi, as the caster of the blood arts, knew the situation in the south and west like the back of his hand. It had to be said that the response of the southern and western tribes was the last thing he wanted to see. It was also the most troublesome thing for him. This was because the other party only attacked from afar and did not approach the Blood Sea at all. As such, he could not do anything to them. Moreover, based on the current situation, he could only persist for half a day at most. After all, the spiritual energy he refined not only had to maintain the Sea of Blood, but he also had to help Haitang and the others recover. Such a consumption was simply not something a Constellation Realm cultivator could endure. Only he, who had the talent tree, could hold on for a while. In less than half a day he would have to withdraw the Blood Sea. Otherwise, once his spiritual energy fell to a certain limit, it would inevitably affect his future strength, and the situation would be even worse. The problem was whether or not he should take back his avatar. If he did, he would be able to replenish his energy in a short period of time. After all, the energy he separated from his avatar was also his own energy. He could quickly merge it with his main body. However, even if he took it back, whether or not he could last until the end of the drill was also a problem. After thinking for a while, Lu Yi decided not to take it back. He had other uses for his avatar outside, and it was about time for him to act. With a thought, the people who had just died in the Blood Sea rushed out from the southern camp and rushed toward the eastern camp. They were clearly rushing to reinforce the battlefield. Only after these people had left did his avatar appear from its hiding place and rush toward the southern camp. Fighting 1 against 2 was still too difficult. There was only hope if he could divide the enemy. He had used this method once when he was fighting for the 9th spirit orb, so there was no harm in using it again. However, at that time, the 5 of them had worked together to break the formation. Now, there was only one avatar. If he wanted to break through the southern camp's defensive formation, he would need more time. This was also the reason why his avatar had moved out now. If it was too early, even if the enemy returned, they would still be able to rush to the battlefield and would not be able to divide the enemy. If it was too late, it would not work either. If he did not break through the defensive formation and move the spirit orbs, the southern camp would not be able to sense it and would naturally not return to reinforce him. This moment was just right. As for why he had chosen the southern camp and not the western camp, the western camp only had 2 spirit orbs, so they had to eat at least 1. On the other hand, the southern camp had 3. Even if they could not obtain more, as long as they could maintain the current situation, they would be able to report back. Thus, no matter what, they could not allow the current situation to change. Time passed, and the 5 people who had died in the southern and western camps returned to the battlefield one after another to rejoin the battle. The pressure on Lu Yi increased, and the most direct manifestation was that the Blood Sea was continuously shrinking. This change was also observed by the enemy, so they naturally attacked with even more vigor. Half a day later, Lu Yi felt that the spirit energy in his body had reached a certain limit. He knew that he could not delay any longer and immediately transmitted his voice. Haitang and the others, who were recovering, opened their eyes. With Lu Ye's help, their spirit energy reserves had been restored to their peak. It could be said that they were in their best condition at this moment. Everyone knew that the time for the final battle had arrived. Whether or not they could maintain the current situation would depend on this final battle. At the same time, in the southern camp, the doppelganger had finally broken through the formation. He pushed his spirit energy with all his might towards a spirit orb, then pushed it out of the camp. The cultivators of the 2 camps who were attacking the blood orbs sensed it at the same time. Duan Xiuqun cursed, "Why the fuck are they doing this again?" Such a thing had happened before. It was not that they did not take precautions, but when they first came to attack, they saw the 9 people from the eastern camp gathered together, so they took it for granted that the same thing would not happen again. The people from the eastern camp were all in the camp, so who would attack their camp? But this thing happened, which was really inconceivable. The 9 people from the western camp were with them, and there were no signs of anyone from the eastern camp leaving. So how did the formation of their camp get broken? How did the spirit orbs move? It couldn't be that a 4th force had appeared in the black abyss, could it? There was no way to investigate, but it was a fact that the spirit orbs were moving faster and faster. If they did not hurry to stop them, they might really be stolen. Duan Xiuqun made a prompt decision and immediately pointed at the early stage of a constellation. Go back and check the situation. Receiving the order, the early stage constellation immediately committed suicide. In the next instant, he appeared at his own camp and hurriedly chased after the source of the spiritual ball's fluctuations. Soon he saw the traces of the spiritual ball. When he focused his gaze, he saw a familiar figure pushing the spiritual ball with all his might. The man was dumbfounded, almost unable to believe his eyes, because he found that the one pushing the spirit orbs was actually that guy called Lu Yi. Before he could take out a sound talisman to send a message, a sword light slashed at him like a waterfall. Unable to dodge in time, he was directly cut in half, blood splattering all over the void. After reappearing in his camp, this person's face was slightly pale. Dying twice in a row had consumed a lot of his mind and spirit energy. Adding on the fact that he had been attacking the eastern camp, his spirit energy reserves were now less than 50% of what they usually were. Taking out a sound talisman, he sent a message to inform Duan Xiuqun of the situation. When Duan Xiuqun received the news, he was also dumbfounded. He had always thought that the blood orbs in front of him were Lu Ye's secret technique, but if Lu Yi was the one who attacked the camp, then who made this blood orb secret technique? Even more puzzling was, how did he leave? There were no signs of anyone leaving here at all. The southern and western divisions had been watching this place the entire time. Without much hesitation, Duan Xiuqun immediately pointed out 4 people and had them go back. He had seen Lu Ye's methods before, so he naturally understood that there was no point in having fewer people go, but if they were only dealing with one person, there was no need for them all to go back, especially himself. He needed to stay here and fight for the spirit orbs. Rebirth consumed too much spirit energy, so if it wasn't necessary, he didn't want to do this. Among the 4 people he pointed out, there were 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators. In addition to the one who had gone back earlier, a lineup of 5 people, in Duan Xiuqun's opinion, was enough to deal with Lu Yi. Even if they couldn't kill him, they could snatch the spirit orbs back. That was enough. What's the situation? Yi Chaochuan asked. He really wanted to know what had happened in the southern camp. Duan Xiuqun looked like he had a toothache. I don't know when that brother Lu ran out, but he's attacking our southern camp. Yi Chaochuan was overjoyed. Is that true? My junior brother saw it with his own eyes. How could it be false? Yi Chaochuan immediately laughed. He knows he's no match for you, so he came to disgust you? It was impossible to attack a camp at this time, but that Lu Yi had done so, even abandoning the eastern camp's defense. This was a thankless task. And on the eastern side, they cared about Lu Yi the most. Now that Lu Yi wasn't here, why would they care about the remaining people? Tell your junior brothers to snatch back the spirit orbs and hold Lu Yi back. Don't kill him. Yi Chaochuan hurriedly warned. If he died, he would come back, and that would be another variable. If they held him back and he couldn't come back, then they could easily handle this side. Of course, if he insisted on killing himself, then there was nothing they could do. This Duan knows. I've already told them to do so. Duan Xiuqun continued to attack the tottering blood sea as he replied. Just as he finished speaking, the sound talisman moved again. He hurriedly investigated, and his expression changed greatly. The 5-man lineup he thought was foolproof had actually been completely annihilated by Lu Yi. End of chapter. Chapter 1346. How long had it been? Not a single one of the 5 remained. including 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators. In Duan Xiuqun's perception, the spirit ball placed in his camp was still moving, and it was getting faster and faster. "Brother Yi, I want to go back," Duan Xiuqun said solemnly. He had to go back. Only by going back himself could he stop Lu Yi and take back his spirit ball. "I'll leave this side to you." Yi Chaochuan nodded. "No problem." He hesitated for a moment, then threw a spirit talisman at Duan Xiuqun. "Take this." Duan Xiuqun took it and looked at it, then revealed a shocked expression. "You Western regions are really generous, even bringing this thing out? It's not easy to refine this thing." Yi Chaochuan laughed. "It was originally used to deal with you Southern regions." Duan Xiuqun naturally knew. The Western regions had prepared methods to deal with the Southern regions, so did they? He solemnly put away the spirit talisman, then turned and rushed towards the Blood Sea. "Before I leave, I'll go and check it out." Ever since this huge blood ball appeared, they had been bombarding it from the outside, so they had no idea what was going on inside. It wasn't good for them to go in and check it out. Since they were going to die, it was a good chance to check out the enemy's situation. Even if they couldn't find out much, it would be easier to use destructive methods inside the blood ball and increase the enemy's consumption. Duan Xiuqun's figure disappeared into the blood ball. A moment later, his presence completely disappeared. At the same time, the blood ball that was already greatly reduced in size shrunk a little. It was clearly Duan Xiuqun's contribution before he died. Duan Xiuqun reappeared on the platform in his family's camp. He immediately followed the fluctuations of the spirit orb, and soon saw 5 people off in the distance. Further ahead was the spirit orb, and behind it was a familiar figure. If it wasn't Lu Yi, who else could it be? A moment later, Duan Xiuqun met up with the 5 of them and said seriously, "What's the situation?" A mid-stage constellation realm cultivator said with shame, "The enemy's attacks were too fierce. We were caught off guard and were killed before we even got close." "Killed before we even got close?" Duan Xiuqun frowned. "Isn't he a weapon cultivator? How can he have such a violent long-range attack?" The middle-stage Xingxiu said, "What he used wasn't a weapon cultivator's technique, but a flying sword. I suspect that he cultivates both weapons and swords." It was precisely because they thought that Lu Yi was a weapon cultivator that they didn't put up much of their guard when they chased after him. In the end, he killed them all with just a flash of sword light. The sharpness of that sword light was beyond imagination. Dual cultivation of weapons and swords. The corners of Duan Xiuqun's eyes twitched. What the hell was this? Strictly speaking, sword cultivation was actually a branch of weapon cultivation. However, sword cultivation had already broken away from the various constraints and framework of weapon cultivation and formed its own style. After all, the energy of a cultivator was limited. Even if they cultivated in other branches, it was impossible for them to cultivate deeply. Naturally, they wouldn't have too many achievements, unless there were some very talented people. That Lu Yi was only at the early stage of the star constellation realm, but his flying sword slash could kill a middle-stage star constellation realm cultivator. It could be seen how deep his foundation was as a sword cultivator. "I'll go meet him. You guys keep watch and find an opportunity to snatch back the spirit ball." Duan Xiuqun instructed and took the lead to rush forward. A moment later, there was indeed a flash of sword light coming from the front. He wanted to test Lu Ye's technique, so he didn't dodge. To be safe, he even stuck a golden body talisman on himself. However, when that flash of sword light came, he realized that this attack was extremely weak. Not to mention that he had the golden body talisman to protect him. Even if he didn't, he would have no problem taking it head-on. This kind of attack naturally couldn't kill the middle-stage Xingxiu on his side. Even the middle-stage Xingxiu could resist it, so although he sensed that Lu Ye's technique wasn't strong, he didn't let down his guard. There must be a reason for this abnormality. He didn't think that Lu Ye's technique was just this. Endless flashes of sword light came from the front, turning into a sword river. Duan Xiuqun was like a fish swimming against the current, rushing against the sword river. He looked aggressive, and all the incoming flashes of sword light were neutralized by him. Until a certain moment, an inconspicuous flash of sword light suddenly slashed on his body. The golden body talisman's luster instantly dimmed, and the violent power slashed at him, causing his body to stagnate. Duan Xiuchen, who had been vigilant all this time, immediately moved away when he sensed that something was wrong. His body was drenched in cold sweat, and he finally understood why the middle-stage Xingqiu couldn't withstand a single blow. Lu Ye's flashes of sword light were clearly divided into two types. One was neither painful nor itchy, while the other was sharp and violent. This kind of attack, which was both real and fake, was truly a headache and difficult to guard against. At this time, the clone was also sighing with emotion. The sword gourd was indeed a supreme treasure. The stronger the treasure it devoured, the more powerful the sword qi it produced. The sword gourd now stored a large amount of sword qi, most of which was derived from devouring and refining ordinary spirit and magical tools. Such sword qi could still be useful in the lower four realms, but its damage to the middle stage Xingqiu was limited. At most, it could only be used to harass and confuse the middle stage Xingqiu. However, after returning from the Alpha Origin stage, Lu Yi had seized many high-quality spirit treasures as spoils of war. After all, those spirit treasures were the possession of the top monsters of each domain, and their quality was high enough to support their ascension to the middle stage Xingqiu. Among these spoils of war, Lu Yi kept a handful of black sand and a short pestle to reforge the Pan Mountain saber, while stuffing the rest into the sword gourd. With the help of the sword qi transformed from these spirit treasures, the power would be much greater. One must know that even the best spirit treasures could only be transformed into 9 flashes of sword qi after being devoured by the sword gourd. This was equivalent to using the full lifespan and power of a spirit treasure from these 9 flashes of sword qi. How could it not be powerful? And this was only a spirit treasure. If the sword gourd devoured higher quality treasures, who knew how powerful it would be? It could be said that with the sword gourd and some foundation as a sword cultivator, anyone could become an unparalleled sword cultivator. Lu Yi just so happened to have a good foundation as a sword cultivator. The sword gourd's strength was obvious, but its shortcomings could not be ignored. It consumed too much energy in a fight, and the sword qi it released could not be retrieved. It was different from orthodox sword cultivators, so if one wasn't rich enough, they might go bankrupt after a fight. Sensing that Lu Yi was difficult to deal with, Duan Xiuchen made a prompt decision and transmitted his voice in all directions. The 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators immediately rushed over and joined forces, quickly approaching Lu Ye's direction. Previously, these 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators were mainly at a disadvantage because they were not on guard. Who would have thought that a weapon cultivator would suddenly use a flying sword? That was why they were killed in one blow. Now that they were on guard and had people to share the pressure, it would not be so easy for Lu Yi to kill them again. In a flash, several figures were engaged in a fight. The remaining 2 constellation realm cultivators did not join the battle. Instead, they took advantage of the fact that the clone had no time to care about other things and began to send the spirit balls back to their own camps. Seeing this, the clone did not intend to continue fighting. The clone's purpose here was to divide the enemy and force the southern troops to return by raiding their camps. Now that 5 people had returned from the south, including 1 late stage and 2 mid-stage, his goal had been achieved. If the battle continued, not to mention whether the clone would be in danger, just the consumption of sword qi would be a loss. If he was accidentally killed, then it would be really troublesome. Lu Yi could not be sure what the consequences would be if his clone was killed in the Black Abyss. The only thing he could be sure of was that if his main body died here, he could be reborn in the main camp. With a thought, he made up his mind and suddenly disappeared. Duan Xiuchen and the other 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators were doing their best to suppress the clone, and it was very effective. He had listened to Yi Chaochuan's previous suggestion and did not intend to kill Lu Yi, so as to avoid him returning to the eastern camp and only being a nuisance. But he did not expect the enemy in front of him to suddenly disappear without a trace. Where is he? Duan Xiuchen's face was blank. He spread out his divine sense, but there was no trace of Lu Yi at all. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. At this time, in the misty space where the sunlight and the others were, they could clearly see the 28th light representing the clone leaping and rapidly approaching the eastern camp. Since the goal of dividing the enemy had been achieved, there was no need for the clone to continue staying there. The main body's spiritual energy consumption was too great, so the clone needed to hurry back to meet up with the main body and replenish his own spiritual energy in order to deal with the high-intensity battle that might follow. At this time, in the eastern camp, everyone was already prepared for the final battle. The people from the western camp and the 4 remaining early-stage constellation realm cultivators from the southern camp, a total of 13 people, were still attacking the blood sphere. Until a certain moment, a sharp aura suddenly approached from behind, like a sharp sword. Even though they were very far away, Yi Chaochuan and the others felt a chill run down their spines. Looking back, a streak of sword light immediately entered his vision. Through the cover of the sword light, Yi Chaochuan saw the figure hidden within. He was immediately surprised. Lu Yi? This guy? Wasn't he raiding the southern camp? Why did he come back and so quickly at that? What was Duan Xiuqun doing? He had clearly told him to keep this person busy. There was no time to think. Almost at the same time Yi Chaochuan saw the clone. The sword light that blotted out the sky had already rushed over, like an overturned river or an ocean churning. The 13 constellation realm cultivators of the 2 camps hurriedly used their methods to block. However, Yi Chaochuan quickly discovered that something was wrong, because while the sword light looked extremely frightening, it actually did not have any killing power. He was not the only one who discovered this. The others also discovered this and immediately relaxed. However, at this moment, a miserable cry suddenly rang out. Yi Chaochuan saw from the corner of his eyes that a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator on his side had been killed on the spot. 2 more miserable cries rang out. They were from 2 early-stage constellation realm cultivators. Careful, the power of these sword chis is different. Yi Chaochuan was quick-witted and immediately reacted to what had happened. In the next moment, his expression became grave, because he could sense many auras rapidly approaching from behind. The 9 people hiding in the eastern camp had all come out. They had chosen the moment when the sword light was rampaging and the cultivators of the western and southern camps were flustered. End of this chapter. Chapter 1347. Although Yi Chaochuan had sensed that the eastern camp had turned out in full force, he did not take it to heart. At this moment, all of his attention was on Lu, who was controlling the sword light. Of the eastern camp, only this Lu Yi was an opponent he needed to take seriously. The other party's move just now had already proved this point. In one burst of power he had reaped 3 lives from his side, including a mid-constellation cultivator. This kind of strength could no longer be judged by his realm alone. Yi Chaochuan had long since placed him on the same level as himself. Vaguely, he felt that he had overlooked something, but in the current situation, where did he have the time to think? Only when he was locked on by a powerful divine sense and a sharp slash was about to reach him did Yi Chaochuan suddenly realize what he had overlooked. Since Lu Yi was attacking from behind, then why were there still 9 auras in the eastern camp? There should be 8. And this sharp slash gave him a sense of déjà vu. Struck by inspiration, Yi Chaochuan's figure suddenly shot forward, meeting the incoming sword light. He had originally wanted to dodge this sword light that gave him a faint sense of threat, but now he had no other choice. Not only could he not dodge, he had to meet it head-on. It could only be said that the person attacking him from behind was extremely crafty. The sword light flashed, and Yi Chaochuan dodged, but the sword light pierced through his chest, bringing with it a gush of blood. Yi Chaochuan did not even look back, quickly dashing forward. In his senses, the auras of life around him began to wither. When he finally passed through the sword light's blockade and arrived at a relatively safe position, he finally had the time to look back at the battlefield. With a single glance, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The original 13 people of the southern and western camps were now only 7 people left. Other than the first 3 killed by Lu Ye's sword chi, in the blink of an eye when he was in danger, another 3 people were killed, including a mid-constellation cultivator. What entered his eyes was the scene of Lu Yi killing the middle constellation realm cultivator. This person had encountered the same situation as Yi Chaochuan, being attacked by a sword light. However, he was not as decisive as Yi Chaochuan. He wanted to block the sharp sword light, but he was killed by Lu Yi. Yi Chaochuan was stunned for a moment. He glanced at the figure in the battlefield, then looked at the figure on the other side who was controlling the sword light. His expression was slightly dazed. Lu Yi? Moreover, with his eyesight he couldn't tell which one was real and which one was fake. It seemed that both of them were real. When Yi Chaochuan saw Lu Yi galloping towards the last constellation realm cultivator on his side without stopping, he no longer dared to hesitate. With a flash, he was about to rush over to help. He had already experienced Lu Yi's terrifying means and knew that his companions could not resist him. If he did not come to their aid, the other party would be doomed. However, as soon as he moved, a large amount of sword light attacked him, obstructing his steps. On the other side, Lu Yi had already led Huang Li and Su Xinghe to the last constellation realm cultivator's side. Along the way, he had also killed an early constellation realm cultivator. However, this short delay still gave the enemy a chance to catch his breath. By the time Lu Yi's team reached him, he had already activated his golden body talisman. Golden light enveloped him. Not only did this constellation realm cultivator activate his golden body talisman, everyone on the battlefield except for Lu Yi activated theirs. In a flash, golden light shone dazzlingly. However, how could the mountain plate saber reinforced with divine edge spirit inscriptions be so easy to block? In the face of absolute power, this person could not guarantee his safety even with the golden body talisman. It had to be said that a constellation realm cultivator's golden body talisman was indeed stronger than an early constellation realm cultivator's. Previously, Lu Yi had single-handedly killed an early constellation realm cultivator with the golden body talisman's protection. He needed 3 slashes to succeed. This time, even with Huang Li and Su Xinghe's help, he still needed 5 slashes. On the battlefield, with the death of the last constellation realm cultivator and Yi Chaochuan being held back by his clone, the outcome was decided. The 3 teams on the east side quickly killed off the remaining early constellation realm cultivators. Lu Yi turned his head and stared at Yi Chaochuan. However, this guy was very slippery. Seeing that the situation was bad, he immediately slapped a talisman on himself. He turned into a streak of light and flew away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The boiling battlefield calmed down. Aside from being excited, the people on the east side all curiously sized up Lu Yi's main body and clone. Even Haitang, who had already guessed it, was the same. The hominid race could refine things like golden body talismans, so they were not unfamiliar with clones. In fact, when a cultivator's cultivation reached a high level, there were still many people who had clones. It was just that the way they displayed it was different. Some used secret arts, some used external items to refine them. For example, Yun Xuechu's Shao Dai clone was a form of the death art. It was because of this consideration that Lu Yi did not mind exposing his clone. After all, it was not something unique to him, so it did not matter much if it was exposed. However, it was not easy to expose the Dragon Emperor. In the Alpha Origin stage, Lu Yi had used the Dragon Emperor in front of many people. Many people had guessed that the disappearance of the pill gourd had a lot to do with the person who used the Dragon Emperor. Even if the pill gourd did not fall into the hands of that person, it must be in the hands of that person's accomplice. The hominid race was not isolated from the rest of the world, but drifted around Fangzuan Mountain. If the Dragon Emperor was used here, it might attract the attention of others. In particular, Lu Yi had indeed participated in the battle for the Spirit Sea of the Alpha Origin stage. It was very easy for others to make the connection. Others did not know what use the pill gourd had. They only knew that it was a supreme treasure, and anyone would be tempted by it. As for the sword gourd, Lu Yi was not very worried because he was not the only sword cultivator dressed like this. Moreover, it was rumored that the sword gourd's power could destroy stars and extinguish the sun. He could at most use the sword gourd to kill constellations, which was very different from the rumors. It would naturally not attract the attention of others. No one asked anything. Under everyone's attention, the clone crashed into the main body and disappeared without a trace. Only the clothes and sword gourd were left behind, which Lu Yi put away. "Have one, right?" Huang Li asked in a small voice. The southern and western divisions had joined forces to attack, and only Yi Chaochuan was left. From the looks of it, it was impossible for him to do anything else. There was limited time until the end of the martial exercise, and there were not many chances left for the southern and western divisions. Even if they rushed over, it would be useless if they could not snatch the spirit orbs in a short period of time. After all, it would take time to transport the spirit orbs back to the camp. Therefore, if they were smart enough, they should stay in the camp and wait for the time limit to arrive. "Should be." Su Xinghe's expression was somewhat dazed. "Don't be careless." Although Haitang also felt that there wouldn't be any big changes in the martial arts practice this time, as the leader on the surface, she still didn't let her guard down. This time, it's rare for the East to be the closest to first place. No matter what others do, we have to do our own. Han Malong immediately nodded. Senior Sister Haitang is right. He changed the topic and smiled mischievously. But looking at the time, they already have no chance, unless they can rush over in a short period of time. But the camp is so far away from each other, how can they? At this point, Han Malong seemed to have thought of something and abruptly stopped talking. It was also at this moment that a violent fluctuation of spirit energy suddenly rose from the distance. Everyone in the Eastern Division raised their heads and looked in that direction, only to see a huge pillar of light soaring into the sky, enveloping a large area. Within the strong fluctuation of spirit energy, it was Yi Chaochuan's aura. And that direction was the direction Yi Chaochuan had fled in. The expressions of the Eastern Division's people instantly became serious. Han Malong's face was even more miserable as he slapped his own mouth. "My crow's mouth. What is this?" Lu Yi frowned. Looking at everyone's expressions, it was obvious that they had realized what had happened. "Great teleportation talisman," Haitang replied in a low voice. "Only martial uncles Rizhao have the qualifications to refine jade talismans. Even in my dwarf clan, it is considered a rare item and extremely precious." Lu Yi instantly understood. Is this a trump card given by the Western Division? The three divisions of the dwarf clan had been competing in the Black Abyss for many years, so there were some rules that had been agreed upon. One of them was that they could not ask for external help from the late constellation realm. This was because they were afraid that if they opened this loophole, the three divisions would ask for external help from the late constellation realm. In addition, the Rizhao would always prepare a trump card for the dwarf clan. Basically, it was a talisman that had a function and was not focused on killing. Otherwise, if everyone held the talismans refined by the Rizhao, they would be able to erupt with power far beyond their own strength, which would lose the purpose of the martial arts demonstration. This kind of trump card was basically based on array talismans for generations, such as the 9-chain curve array talisman that Haitang kept. This kind of trump card would not necessarily be used, but it was necessary to have it so that when others used it, they would not be able to deal with it. The Southern and Western divisions also had such trump cards. Now it seemed that the Western Division's trump card was the Great Transmission Talisman. As the Western Division's overall strength was the strongest, what they lacked was not offensive means. The Rizhao understood this very well, so they prepared a talisman that could allow them to move quickly to deal with unexpected situations. The one Yi Chaochuan gave to Duan Xiuchen was the Great Transmission Talisman. This thing came in pairs, otherwise it would not be able to complete the transmission. His original intention was to wait for the right opportunity to bring Duan Xiuchen and the others back to the Southern Division, then work together to divide the Eastern Division's spirit orbs. But the situation had changed too quickly. Right now, everyone in the Southern Division was at the Southern Division's main camp, and he was the only one left in the Western Division. It could be said that the Western Division was destined to be useless. But he was unwilling to give up just like that. If the Eastern Division, with such a weak lineup, took first place, both the Southern and Western Divisions would lose face. Right now, he could only place his hopes on the Southern Division. Even if the Southern Division took first place, it was still acceptable. Moreover, with the help this time, it would be more convenient for the two divisions to work together next time. It was because of these considerations that Yi Chaochuan used this extremely precious Great Transmission Talisman. In the sky, a huge and mysterious array talisman slowly rotated in the void. One figure after another appeared beside Yi Chaochuan. Chapter 1348. When he appeared, Duan Xiuchen's face was as calm as still water. Before this battle, no one would have thought that the situation would develop in such a bizarre way. In the Black Abyss, the eastern side had the absolute advantage. Not only did they have 4 balls in their hands, they had almost completely wiped out the southern and western sides in the battle just now. This made everyone from the southern and western tribes feel a deep sense of defeat and humiliation. There wasn't much time left. Whether they could snatch the spirit balls from the eastern side would depend on this final battle. Originally, Duan Xiuchen didn't dare to leave his camp so easily. After all, there was still the elusive Lu Yi there. But after the reincarnation of the Southern Constellation Masters, Duan Xiuchen immediately realized that the Lu Yi he saw before had already arrived at the eastern camp. Since that was the case, the southern side had a chance to go all out. So when they sensed the summoning of Yi Chaochuan's Great Transfer Talisman, they made a prompt decision and brought all their men over. Turning around, they saw Yi Chaochuan sitting in front with a pale face. His aura was extremely weak, and his clothes were stained with blood from the right side of his chest. Duan Xiuchen immediately understood that Yi Chaochuan no longer had the strength to fight. It wasn't because of his injuries. For a late Constellation Master, a piercing wound on the right side of his chest wasn't a big problem. The main problem was the consumption of spiritual energy. The Great Transfer Talisman was a top-grade talisman refined by a Sunshine Realm cultivator. It wasn't something that could be casually activated. Under normal circumstances, Yi Chaochuan would have to work with others to activate it, or set up a formation first and borrow the power of the formation to activate the Great Transfer Talisman. But he was alone and had no place to borrow power. Time was tight, and he didn't have the time to set up a formation. Relying on his own strength, the consumption of spiritual energy was terrifying. In addition to the continuous battles before, it could be said that Yi Chaochuan's spiritual energy had almost dried up. In such a state, he couldn't participate in the following battles. Luckily, he was a late Constellation Master. If it was an early or middle Constellation Master, he might not be able to activate the talisman even if he used up all his spiritual energy. Their eyes met, and Yi Chaochuan revealed a bitter smile. "Brother Duan, I'll leave the rest to the southern side. If the eastern side really takes first place, we'll be too embarrassed." Duan Xiuchen's expression was solemn. "Don't worry, Brother Yi. With the western region helping us so much, if we don't cherish this opportunity, then we'll be useless. We'll definitely slaughter the eastern region." Yi Chaochuan nodded slightly. He closed his eyes and focused. He held 2 spiritual jades in his hands to recover his body. Duan Xiuchen turned to look at the eastern camp. The 4 shining spirit balls were extremely dazzling. His gaze became resolute as he shouted in a low voice, "Activate the talismans." The western region had already used their trump card for this final battle, and they had left the opportunity for the southern region. How could the southern region be stingy? Following Duan Xiuchen's order, a majestic and powerful aura began to fluctuate and spread out in all directions. In the eastern camp, Han Malong's expression was stern. "They've used the formation talisman. Is there a need to fight like this?" Haitang took a step forward. "All this time, the first place has always been fought for by the southern and western divisions. Especially this time, the lineup of the 2 divisions is unprecedentedly strong. If they can't win first place, they won't have the face to see Nicho. They have no other choice." Han Malong nodded. "Looks like we have no other choice either." Haitang held a jade talisman in her hand. An extremely mysterious aura emanated from the jade talisman. She shouted, "Activate the talisman." The formation talisman was the culmination of the hominid race's talisman arts. The requirements to make it were extremely high. Only Sunshine Realm cultivators were qualified to make it. Strictly speaking, It was a kind of strategic reserve for the hominid race. With the help of the formation talisman, cultivators could easily form a formation and then combine their powers to unleash power beyond their original level. From this point alone, the formation talisman was similar to the twin chi-linked branches formation disc. However, Haitang had said before that the formation talisman was based on the talisman, but the disc was based on the person. Comparatively speaking, when cultivators used the twin chi-linked branches formation disc to form a formation, they could be more flexible and flexible. This was something that the formation talisman could not compare to. However, this did not diminish the power of the formation talisman. Lu Yi had never seen a formation talisman before, so he did not know what to do. He only understood after Haitang explained to him through telepathy. Because the formation talisman was the main element, there was no need to coordinate well with each other after the formation talisman was activated. He only needed to channel his own spiritual power into the formation talisman. He was doing so, and so were the others in the east. The formation talisman in Haitang's hand immediately emitted a dazzling light, and its power rose steadily. After a few breaths, the jade talisman in Haitang's hand suddenly exploded, turning into specks of light that floated in all directions, drowning the 9 people. By the time the fluorescent light dissipated, a gigantic creature had appeared on the platform of the eastern barracks. At a glance, it was a gigantic hydra. It looked ferocious and lifelike as if it was alive. Its body was as large as a small mountain, and its 9 heads were raised high. The snake's tail even coiled around the platform. However, it was only a manifestation of the formation talisman and not a real living creature. Hence, on the surface, the 9-headed snake's body did not look solid. It was formed purely from energy. Through the snake's body, one could clearly see the 9 people in the east camp, each holding a snake head. Lu Yi was still comprehending the mysteries of the formation talisman when he sensed an extremely fierce aura rapidly approaching. Looking up, he saw a giant wolf rapidly dashing towards the location where the southern cultivators had appeared. This giant wolf was not the slightest bit inferior to the 9-headed snake, and there was even a single horn on its forehead that flickered with electric arcs. This was clearly the manifestation of the southern formation talisman, but Yang Kai did not know what it was. Just like the eastern camp, the giant wolf's body was not solid. Through its body, one could see the 9 people in the south camp all over the giant wolf's body, their auras connected. The visual impact of such a gigantic creature rushing towards them was very strong. Moreover, Lu Yi could see that the horn on the giant wolf's forehead was not just for decoration. There was definitely something special about it. In addition, what he was concerned about was that the giant wolf's body was not covered in hair, but with sharp edges that looked like scales. It could be foreseen that the giant wolf's defense was not weak. The battle was on the verge of breaking out, and there was no time to familiarize himself with it. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi saw the giant wolf's figure, the other side's horn flashed with electric light, and after about 3 breaths of time, a huge beam of light shot towards them. The beam of light swept forward silently, but its speed was extremely fast. Almost at the same time that the beam of light erupted, the attack had already landed on the 9-headed snake's body. A penetrating hole immediately appeared in the snake's thick body, and its huge body became somewhat unstable. Standing on one of the snake heads, Lu Yi even felt like the ground was shaking, as if the other side's attack had really landed on his body. Before he could regain his footing, he immediately felt a pulling force that was rapidly devouring his spiritual power and replenishing the snake's body. At the same time, the 9-headed snake's tail slammed against the camp's platform, and with the help of the recoil, it leapt forward to meet the giant wolf. This was clearly the power of the formation talisman controlled by Haitang. 9 people working together to activate the formation talisman naturally had a master and a subordinate. If it had been any other time, with Lu Ye's strength and previous performance, Haitang would definitely have let him take the lead. However, Lu Yi knew nothing about formation talismans, and there was no time to familiarize himself with them, so Haitang naturally took the lead position. Although she did not have much experience in fighting with people, she knew the principle of playing to one's strengths and avoiding one's weaknesses. The giant wolf manifested by the formation talisman had long-range attacks, so it was better to engage in close combat. The hole in the snake's body looked frightening, but it was not a real body of flesh and blood after all. As long as there was enough spirit chi, it could be quickly repaired. Of course, this was a great test for the cultivators controlling the formation talisman's spirit chi endurance, because repairing such a hole would consume a lot of spirit chi. Lu Yi immediately realized that this battle of formation talismans was not just a competition of control over the formation talismans, but also a competition of the foundations of each side. Both formation talismans were refined by solar reflection cultivators of the humanoid race. Even if there were differences between the talismans themselves, the differences should not be too great. Therefore, strictly speaking, the maximum power of the two talismans was about the same. However, because the cultivators controlling the talismans were different, the power of the talismans would naturally be different. The eastern side was clearly at a disadvantage, because their overall strength was much weaker than the eastern side. This was probably one of the reasons why the southern side had decisively used their formation talismans. Previously, they had been tormented by the eastern side's various schemes and machinations. Since that was the case, then let's have a real fight. Formation talismans required the cooperation of everyone to activate. This way, it would also greatly suppress Lu Ye's individual performance. Even if he had the ability to kill enemies above his level, he would not be able to use it in a battle like this. At the same time, it would also deprive the eastern side of the space to continue their schemes and machinations. Hai Tang knew how to play to her strengths and avoid her weaknesses, so there was no reason for the southern side not to know. In the air, the two enormous creatures rapidly approached each other and soon collided. The sound of a wolf howling could be heard. The giant wolf opened its mouth and bit down on one of the snake heads. At the same time, it stretched out its claws and grabbed the other two snake heads. However, the remaining 6 snake heads, under the control of the eastern cultivators, bit down on the giant wolf's body. From afar, if one ignored the two enormous creatures' immaterial bodies, this was not a battle between cultivators at all, but the most primitive battle between two ancient beasts. Lu Yi felt that the other side wanted to take care of him, because the wolf had bitten towards the snake head he was on. Fortunately, he had dodged quickly enough and did not let the wolf succeed. Instead, it had caused Zhang Chao, who was beside him, to suffer. The giant wolf was exerting its strength, trying to bite off the snake head Zhang Chao was on. However, it was still the manifestation of a formation talisman. How could it be so easy to bite off? Lu Yi felt his spiritual energy rapidly flowing towards the snake head Zhang Chao was on to replenish the energy he had consumed there. He himself had a strange feeling, as if he had really turned into a snake head and bitten the enemy's body. There was only one feeling that came back to him, hard. The giant wolf's body was covered in angular scales. Sure enough, it was an extremely strong defense. End of chapter. Chapter 1349. The 9-headed snake was lifelike and looked like a living creature. The 2 fangs in the snake's mouth were like 2 sharp swords. They looked indestructible, but when they bit down on the giant wolf, they were blocked by the giant wolf's defenses and couldn't bite through. As a result, their attacks were no longer a threat to the giant wolf. Lu Yi understood that it wasn't that their talismans weren't good enough, but that the cultivators controlling them weren't strong enough to display the full power of the talismans. If they had the same level of strength, their performance wouldn't have been so poor. He pushed his spirit force and fiercely exerted his strength. Only then did he feel the snake's fangs pierce through the giant wolf's defenses and slowly penetrate. However, this kind of damage was clearly not enough. The 2 giant creatures were locked in a stalemate, and neither side retreated. The eastern side didn't dare to retreat in case the giant wolf used its horn to launch another fierce attack. The western side had a certain advantage and didn't need to retreat. After a short stalemate, the eastern side realized that the situation wasn't good. Their spirit force was rapidly being consumed, and it flowed toward Zhang Chao's snake head. Zhang Chao had been bitten by the giant wolf, so he consumed the most spirit force. On the other hand, the other 2 snake heads were caught by the giant wolf's claws, so they didn't need to worry too much. This stalemate was undoubtedly extremely disadvantageous for the eastern side. Once Zhang Chao's snakehead couldn't hold on and was bitten by the giant wolf, even if their talismans weren't broken, their power would be greatly reduced. When that time came, the situation would be even worse. Right at this moment, a thick snake tail suddenly swept through the air and viciously struck the giant wolf's body. Light flashed wildly at the point of impact, as if the defensive formation was being attacked. The giant wolf's body staggered from the impact, and the southern cultivators who were in the middle of it trembled violently. The snake tail that had slammed into the giant wolf's body wrapped around it. It was clear that it wanted to restrain the giant wolf. If the eastern side succeeded, the southern side would find it difficult to escape. The southern snake reacted quickly as well. After realizing the intentions of the eastern side, it immediately released the 3 snakeheads that were clamped down. Its huge body darted forward, avoiding the snake tails while its sharp claws plowed 2 deep gashes on the heads of the 2 snakes that it had grabbed. The gashes flickered with spirit force and were quickly repaired by the 9 eastern cultivators' spirit force. The giant wolf couldn't run far, because the Hydra, who had gotten rid of the shackles, turned around and chased after it. Haitang was obviously unwilling to let the distance between them increase, lest the other party use the long-range attack again. Seeing that there was no way to escape, the giant wolf turned around and engaged in a fierce battle with the Hydra. The 2 sides tore at each other, causing the surrounding meteors to shatter. The battle was so grand that Yi Chaochuan, who was recovering in the distance, was dazzled. Let alone an outsider like Lu Yi, this was the first time he had experienced something like this. Even the mini-men themselves had never experienced something like this before. After all, array glyphs couldn't be used casually. Everyone here was activating array glyphs for the first time. The only advantage they had over Lu Yi was that they knew more about array glyphs. In terms of real experience, everyone was actually on the same starting line. It was in this most primitive of battles that the 18 people on both sides were constantly familiarizing themselves with the power of the array glyphs. As they familiarized themselves with the array glyphs, the figures of the Hydra and giant wolf, which had been rather rigid, gradually became more nimble. If the 2 behemoths were like marionettes in the beginning, and their movements were a little stiff, then at this moment, the 2 behemoths were truly alive. Every time they collided, they looked extremely dangerous and earth-shattering. Lu Yi had already taken out a large amount of spirit jades from the Hydra's head, madly refining and devouring them. There were also quite a few astral beast cores in his stomach. This kind of battle was a huge burden on a cultivator's spirit force, because every wound on the 2 beasts required spirit force to heal. In the field of recovering spirit force, he had a unique advantage. However, the situation still wasn't optimistic. After all, the southern side was stronger as a whole, and their array glyphs were stronger as well. In the process of fighting, the giant wolf could easily injure the Hydra, while the Hydra found it very difficult to mount an effective counterattack. Haitang had long been aware of this and had been trying to tie up the giant wolf, but to no avail. If this situation continued, the eastern side would undoubtedly lose, because in terms of consumption, the eastern side was at a disadvantage. Even if Lu Yi desperately refined spirit jades to replenish himself, he couldn't make up for it. Once the eastern side's array glyphs were broken, they would only be slaughtered in the face of a ferocious beast like the giant wolf. At that time, they would no longer be able to keep the spirit balls in their camp. Everyone in the eastern side saw this and were secretly anxious, but there was nothing they could do. Lu Yi was also thinking of a way to break out of this situation, but no matter how much he thought about it, he didn't seem to have a good idea. In such a battle, it was difficult for an individual to change the situation. It could be said that the southern side's array glyphs forced the eastern side to respond with array glyphs, which essentially wiped out the space he could play. At the beginning of the battle, the giant wolf paid special attention to him and repeatedly bit the snake head he was on. However, after discovering that even the snake head controlled by Lu Yi could only cause limited damage to its side, it no longer paid attention to him. The giant wolf opened its mouth wide and bit whichever snake head was most convenient. There were so many choices anyway, so it didn't matter which one it bit. In another confrontation, Lu Yi controlled his snake head to bite the giant wolf's neck. At this moment, the other side was attacking the other snake head and turned a blind eye to Lu Ye's bite. Lu Yi glanced at the two sharp fangs of the snake head he was on and his heart stirred, spirit force surged, and the two fangs were blessed with the divine edge spirit tattoo. He bit down. After a momentary pause, the originally sturdy defense was directly broken, and the fangs, which were 2 meters long, ruthlessly pierced the giant wolf's neck as easily as piercing tofu. With another vicious bite, a piece of the giant wolf's neck was immediately cut off, and spirit light surged inside. It actually worked. Lu Ye's eyes lit up as he saw a turning point in the battle. All this time, he had only blessed his mountain plate saber with the divine edge spirit tattoo. He had never thought of blessing anything else until he caught a glimpse of these two fangs. Since his side's attack wasn't enough to break the other side's defense, he would strengthen his attack. This was what the divine edge spirit tattoo was used for. He realized that he had found a way to break the stalemate in a flash of inspiration. The combination of talismans and spirit tattoos could produce unexpected and miraculous effects. When his side succeeded, the southern side was shocked. Since the beginning of the battle, the giant wolf hadn't suffered any serious injuries, causing them to mistakenly think that victory was already in their hands and that the eastern side would lose without a doubt. However, with a large piece of the giant wolf's neck missing, the southern side's 9 people began to rapidly consume their spirit force. How could they not be shocked? The only advantage they had now was that the giant wolf's defense was strong enough, and their talismans were more powerful than the eastern side's. If they didn't even have this advantage, how could they win against the eastern side? Duan Xiuqun reacted quickly. After realizing the problem, he immediately focused on Lu Ye's position. In the next few confrontations, he would rather not attack the Hydra than let Lu Yi take a bite out of it. Being targeted like this, it would be very difficult for Lu Yi to succeed, even if Haitong's side was fully cooperating with him and constantly creating opportunities for him to attack. Through the bodies of the two giant creatures, Lu Yi saw Duan Xiuqun's gaze fixed on him. It was clear that he wanted to kill him, which made Lu Yi feel very helpless. Since he couldn't succeed on his side, he could only let others do it. In other words, he would bless the other snake's fangs with the divine edge spirit tattoo. In other environments, it would be very difficult for Lu Yi to do this. The construction of spirit tattoos required the infusion of spirit force. Without direct contact, it was naturally impossible to construct spirit tattoos. However, under the cover of the talisman, the 9 people were one. Lu Ye's spirit force could flow to any part of the Hydra, giving him the opportunity to bless the other fangs with spirit tattoos. In another confrontation, Duan Xiuqun, as before, defended against Lu Yi and ignored the attacks of the other snakeheads. However, in the next moment, his expression changed greatly. Because of the other 8 snakeheads, one of them suddenly and easily broke through his defense and tore off a part of the giant wolf's body, causing a large amount of spirit force to be lost. He looked over and memorized the position of the snakehead. He thought that as long as he continued to target it, he could avoid the disadvantage just now, but in the next moment, a scene that made him collapse occurred. Every time they confronted each other, one of the Hydra's heads would break through his defense. Sometimes it was one head, sometimes it was another head, sometimes it was even 2 or 3 at the same time. There was no pattern at all. Duan Xiuqun couldn't figure out why the eastern side's offensive had suddenly become so fierce. Logically speaking, the difference in overall strength between the two sides was so great that the suppression of the talisman alone was enough to render the eastern side helpless. The previous confrontation had also proved this point, but for some reason, the situation had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. Everything started when the snakehead Lu Yi was suddenly attacked. If it was said that this had nothing to do with Lu Yi, Duan Xiuqun would never believe it. It was really impossible to guard against. He thought that the talisman would be able to erase Lu Ye's various peculiarities and advantages, but who knew that his thinking was too simple? Even with the power of the talisman, the human reinforcements invited by the eastern side had the ability to interfere. The southern side's advantage had disappeared. After realizing this, Duan Xiuqun understood that if they wanted to win, they could only fight head-on. There was no need to deliberately target anyone, because it was useless. The southern side had completely let go of their hands and feet, controlling the giant wolf manifested by the talisman to constantly clash with the Hydra. The battle between the two giant creatures became particularly fierce at this moment, with new injuries appearing on their bodies all the time. At first, the cultivators on both sides could still repair their injuries, but as the number of injuries increased, the cultivators on both sides could no longer repair them in time. Looking from afar, the two giant creatures were covered in wounds, but they fought endlessly. Let's see who can hold on first. Chapter 1350. The Divine Blade Spirit tattoos made up for the lack of offensive power and brought about a new change in the battle. The collision between the two giant creatures was extremely fierce, and it was hard to tell who was the winner. Both sides were covered in wounds, both old and new, and large chunks of their bodies were missing. Lu Yi was very glad that he had recalled his doppelganger in time. Otherwise, even he would not have been able to withstand such a high-intensity battle. Since the southern and western tribes joined forces to attack, his spiritual power consumption had been in an extremely terrifying state. It was much more intense than the others, especially when he had activated the blood technique to protect his camp. All of his spiritual power had been consumed. Therefore, even if he had a unique advantage in the field of spiritual power recovery, it was difficult to prevent his spiritual power from being depleted. Now, he had to constantly reinforce the Divine Blade Spirit tattoos in the battle, which also consumed a lot of spiritual power. It must be known that each fang was 6 feet long. Compared to the usual strengthening of the mountain pan saber, the construction of the spirit tattoos consumed more spiritual power. If he had not recalled his doppelganger and replenished his spiritual power, it would have been difficult to continue. At present, the cultivators of the two tribes each had their own advantages and disadvantages. The southern side had always held the advantage in terms of overall strength and resources. Although the eastern side's overall strength was weaker, because of Lu Ye's various assistants, before the outbreak of this battle, each side's spiritual power reserves could be considered to be relatively abundant, and they were almost at their peak state to fight. However, the southern side was different. There was a limit to the speed at which they could recover their spiritual energy. Moreover, in the previous battles, the southern side had experienced various revivals. Those who were unlucky had already died several times, and their spiritual energy had fallen to varying degrees. This was one of the reasons why the eastern side was able to compete with the southern side. The Divine Blade Spirit tattoos only increased the offensive power of the eastern side's talismans. If they did not have enough spiritual power reserves, the eastern side's cultivators would not be able to hold on for long. The fierce battle was intense. Until a certain moment, Hai Tang, who had been constantly trying, finally found an opportunity. The giant 9-headed snake's huge body tightly wrapped around the giant wolf's body, not giving it any room to move. The giant wolf struggled, its huge mouth and claws continuously causing damage to the 9-headed snake, but it was unable to break free. Instead, the 9-headed snake fiercely attacked, suppressing the giant wolf. This scene clearly showed that the eastern side was going to obtain the final victory. This made the eastern side excited, and they worked even harder. However, how could the south let the east have their way? After realizing that it was impossible to break free from the shackles of the east, the south no longer made any useless efforts. The horn on the giant wolf's forehead began to glow, and lightning arcs jumped about. Seeing this, how could the people of the east not know what the south was planning? When the two sides first clashed with array talismans, their side had suffered a loss from this move. This was a ferocious attack that the 9-headed snake manifested by his own formation talisman could not resist at all, because its defense was not strong enough. In such a situation, the eastern side had no choice but to continue restraining the giant wolf's movements. At the same time, the attacks of the 9 snakeheads became more and more fierce. However, in the end, the suppressive power was not enough. After accumulating power for a full 5 breaths, a beam of light that was like liquid thunder fiercely blasted out, hitting the joint between the snake's head and body. Without a sound, a huge hole appeared. The spirit energy of the 9 people from the east quickly flowed towards that location, trying to heal their injuries. However, the attack from the south wasn't over yet. Before the pillar of lightning disappeared, the giant wolf's head moved slightly to the left and right. Like cutting tofu, the 9-headed snake's body was cut in half. The formation talisman shattered, and the 9 figures flew out from the 9 snake heads, each with a panicked expression. In a competition of formation talismans, if the formation talisman was broken first, it would undoubtedly be at a great disadvantage. After all, the giant creature manifested by the formation talisman was not something that a cultivator of this level could resist. None of the people from the east had expected that they would be one step behind in such a confrontation. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Only Lu Yi had already pulled out his mountain pan saber as his body flew out, thrusting it straight at the giant wolf covered in wounds from afar. Like stars falling from the sky, specks of starlight bloomed, each of them a manifestation of saber light. Sensing Lu Ye's response, the people from the east hurriedly pulled themselves together and used their own methods. The power of the talismans was activated, turning into a continuous barrage of attacks that bombarded the giant wolf's body. After activating the pillar of lightning, the giant wolf's body had become extremely transparent. Even the faces of the southern cultivators were extremely pale. At this moment, when the attacks from the east landed, the giant wolf suddenly collapsed, and the 9 people from the south met the same fate as the ones from the east. The eyes of the people from the east, who were still panicking, lit up when they saw this. They immediately realized that the south side was also an arrow at the end of its flight. Although the pillar of lightning was powerful, it also consumed a lot of energy. The remaining energy of the southern cultivators was no longer enough to maintain the formation talisman's operation. That was why it shattered under a round of attacks from their side. In the end, the confrontation between the formation talismans ended in a draw. Duan Xiuqun gritted his teeth and roared, "Kill!" He originally thought that he could take down the east with the formation talisman, but who knew that the other side would be so tenacious? Now that the formation talisman was gone, they could only rely on their own methods. Almost at the same time that Duan Xiuqun gave the order to attack, another voice came from not far away. "Brother Duan, I'm coming to help you." The people from the east looked in the direction of the voice, and their faces sank. They saw a streak of light in the lead, followed by 8 streaks of light, rushing toward them aggressively. It was the 9 people from the west side. Originally, these people, aside from Yi Chaochuan, had all been reborn back to the main camp. However, when the formation talismans of the east and south clashed, the 8 of them had already rushed over, just in time for the final clash. Seeing the formation talismans of the east and south shatter, Yi Chaochuan took the lead and led his subordinates to attack. However, just as he finished speaking, his expression changed. A figure had already passed by the southern camp at some point in time and was rushing toward them aggressively. It was Lu Yi. Yi Chaochuan was speechless. He didn't know what was wrong with Lu Yi. He should have been competing with the south, but now he was charging toward the west. Normally, Yi Chaochuan wouldn't be afraid to fight. He'd even be eager to have a real fight with Lu Yi to test out his true abilities. However, he'd used his own strength to activate the Great Transportation Talisman and bring the 9 people from the south over. He'd almost exhausted himself. While the formation talismans of the east and south were clashing, he'd recovered a bit. However, he hadn't recovered much. Right now, he only had 1/3 of his usual spirit energy. He couldn't use much of his strength. Facing the fierce Lu Yi, how could he dare to face him head-on? Thus, he made a prompt decision and turned to flee, wanting to meet up with his men first. Behind him, Yi Chaochuan sensed with his divine sense that it was an imperial tool. He didn't take it to heart and only dodged slightly, easily avoiding it. He was slightly confused. They were already at the star constellation level, so why use imperial tools? However, in the next instant, a bright saber light flashed in his vision. He didn't even have time to slap a golden body talisman on himself before he was killed on the spot. He was reborn in his own camp with a dazed expression. He really didn't even know how he died. Yi Chaochuan had been watching the battle from afar, so how could Lu Yi not know? He also knew that the 8 people from the west were rushing over here. Thus, before Yi Chaochuan shouted, he'd already seen the movements of the west. He definitely couldn't let the south and west join forces, especially the 2 late-stage star constellation. If they joined forces, then his side would be in big trouble. Thus, Lu Yi directly targeted Yi Chaochuan. The reason why he didn't kill Duan Xiuqun was naturally because he wanted to pick on the weak. In comparison, Yi Chaochuan's condition was worse, so he was easier to kill. In this kind of battle, how to quickly choose a suitable opponent was the key to victory. The 8 people from the west watched as Yi Chaochuan was killed in one strike. They were shocked but also furious. The late-stage star constellation was their leader, their signature. No matter how fierce the 3 divisions were, there was no precedent of a late-stage star constellation dying in battle. Duan Xiuqun's death didn't count. That was self-destruction. Now, in front of the 3 divisions, the signature of the West, Yi Chaochuan, was killed like a little chick. How could they not be furious? Especially one of the 3 mid-stage star constellation. He shouted, "Kill him, avenge senior brother Yi." There was no need for them to search for him. After Lu Yi killed Yi Chaochuan, he brazenly charged towards the people of the west. As he ran, he slashed with his long saber. Huge saber rays cut through the air. His body followed the saber rays, forcibly blocking the wild attacks of the people of the west, and crashed into the crowd. Then, a huge lotus slowly bloomed. Its light was dazzling, like the eruption of a great sun, enveloping a large area. Amidst the brilliant might, several auras were annihilated at almost the same time. By the time the light faded away, the surviving cultivators in the west looked towards the battlefield with lingering fear. Lu Ye's figure was nowhere to be seen. 4 people from their side had also disappeared along with him, including 2 mid-stage constellation realm cultivators. They were all speechless, their hearts shaken. Even after all the previous battles, they all knew that Lu Yi of the East was an extremely strange person. His strength couldn't be measured purely by his cultivation realm. But after truly encountering him, they finally understood how terrifying he was. Yi Chaochuan of the 9 people of the West was first killed, then another 4 instantly died. Now there were only 4 left, 1 mid-stage and 3 early stage. It could be said that their losses were disastrous. On the platform of the East camp, Lu Ye's figure appeared. The feeling of rebirth didn't feel uncomfortable, and the entire process was very fast, so fast that he didn't feel anything. This made him a little disappointed. He originally wanted to experience the various mysteries of rebirth, but now, it seemed that he was overthinking. The Black Abyss was an extremely special place. Here, he was only a projection, not his real body. Chapter 1351. This was the first time Lu Yi had been reborn in the Black Abyss. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that he was pursuing speed and efficiency, he wouldn't have had to do this at all, but time was of the essence and there was no time for him to slowly hunt down the Western Side's people. He had completely given up on defending himself and poured all his strength into attacking, so he was powerless to resist the Western Side's counterattack. After all, they were 8 constellation mansions, not 8 little chicks, especially when 3 of them were mid-stage constellation mansions. In a single confrontation, he had killed 4 of them. Having said that, being able to be reborn was also thanks to Su Yuqing. According to Su Yuqing's previous plan, Lu Yi would enter the Black Abyss in an opportunistic way. In this way, he wouldn't be able to be reborn, and if he died in battle, he would really die. However, things didn't go according to her plan in the end, and there were some small accidents during this period, which allowed Lu Yi to obtain the same rebirth ability as the other midgets. A figure suddenly appeared beside him, and Lu Yi turned his head to see that it was Han Malong. This guy was also killed. Not surprisingly, when he abandoned the original battlefield and rushed towards the western side, he already knew that the remaining people on his side wouldn't have a good ending. After all, with the strength of the Haitang 8 against the 9 from the south, it was too much. After being reborn, Han Malong was eager to join the battlefield again, but Lu Yi patted him on the shoulder and stopped him. "Wait!" Lu Yi ordered. Han Malong nodded, stuffed a spirit pill into his mouth, and silently waited. He understood Lu Ye's intention. At this time, it was useless to fight alone, because while he was rushing to the battlefield, there would definitely be more people on his side being killed. At that time, there would inevitably be a continuous stream of people being defeated one by one. Since that was the case, it was better to wait here and wait for everyone to die once before regrouping. People were constantly being reborn, and after a while, the 9 from the east gathered on the platform of the camp. From this, it could be seen that the gap in strength between them was not small. Not far away, the 9 from the south and the 4 from the west had gathered together and were glaring at them. Lu Yi and Duan Xiuqin's eyes met and saw the unwillingness in each other's eyes, lightly asking, "Still not giving up?" There wasn't much time left. Even if the southern side really managed to snatch the spirit orbs, they probably wouldn't have the chance to transport them back to the main camp. The eastern side wasn't just there for show. They would definitely try to stop the other side during the process of transporting the spirit orbs. When the time limit was up, whichever side's camp was closest to the spirit orb would have it. Therefore, in Lu Ye's opinion, there was no need for the southern and western sides to struggle any longer. Furthermore, in this kind of battle, the eastern side had a huge advantage. After reviving, they could immediately join the battle. On the other hand, if the other 2 divisions died and went back, they would not be able to rush back. It could be said that at this moment, the results of the martial arts demonstration had already been decided, and no one could change it. Lu Yi glanced at Duan Xiuqin. Duan Xiuqin sighed and grinned at Lu Yi. "I'm not convinced. What should we do?" If Lu Yi was a small human, Duan Xiuqin would not have thought too much about it. The rise of the East was a blessing, and it was also a joyous occasion for the small human race. But Lu Yi was a human. This time, the eastern region was able to invite foreign aid that could turn the tide. What about next time? What about next time? He was a small human at the late stage of the constellation realm. Naturally, he would not be convinced that he was suppressed by an early-stage human in this kind of battle. Lu Yi nodded. "Then we can only beat him into submission." Duan Xiuqin said, "So, what comes next has nothing to do with the fight for the spirit orb. It's just a simple battle." No matter what, he had to kill Lu Yi head-on once and let him know that the small humans were not useless. As soon as he finished speaking, his expression turned serious. His figure flickered as he charged toward the eastern barracks and shouted, "Kill!" 12 figures followed closely behind him. With the other party's attitude, the eastern side could only meet them head-on. Duan Xiuqin's target was only Lu Yi. He did not care about the others at all. Moreover, with the current lineup of the southern and western tribes, he did not need to pay attention to the others. As long as he focused on Lu Yi, the remaining people were nothing to be afraid of. Lu Yi sensed his intention and dashed out to meet him. Duan Xiuqin's eyes were filled with fighting spirit and killing intent. It looked like a fierce battle was about to break out. However, just as the 2 figures were about to collide, Lu Yi suddenly turned and swept past from the side. Duan Xiuqin was stunned. He could not stop him in time. When he turned back to look, Lu Yi was already in front of a stunned early-stage constellation realm cultivator. With a raise of his hand, his saber fell, annihilating all life. F***CK. Duan Xiuqin could not hold back and cursed. He quickly turned around and gave chase. However, one step too late. Lu Yi was like a tiger in a flock of sheep and began a massacre. "Golden body talisman, golden body talisman." Duan Xiuqin roared. He could see that there was something wrong with Lu Ye's saber. This unassuming black saber had an unimaginable sharpness. It was not something that an early-stage constellation realm cultivator's protective spirit energy could block. Only the golden body talisman could block it. With his reminder, everyone hurriedly activated their golden body talismans to protect themselves. Then, Duan Xiuqin saw an unbelievable scene. An early-stage constellation realm cultivator that Lu Yi had gotten close to was clearly protected by a golden body talisman, but he was still able to break through his defenses with 1 slash and kill him with 2 slashes. The talismans of the homunculus race were very interesting. The biggest difference between them and the talismans made by other races was that the talismans of the homunculus race could be nurtured with the help of one's own blood essence or spirit force. The longer it was nurtured, the more powerful it would become until it reached its limit. The talismans refined by other races basically did not have this characteristic. Therefore, the hominid race's talismans were highly sought after in the entire universe. However, the hominid race's talismans would not be casually leaked. It was also very difficult for others to obtain them. Lu Yi had previously killed an early-stage constellation realm cultivator with a golden body talisman. That time, he had slashed 3 times because that was a golden body talisman that had been nurtured for 30 years. However, it was different this time. The opponent's golden body talisman was not as powerful as the previous one, so its defense was naturally weaker. The main reason was that they had fought too many battles. The 3 hominid races' powerful talismans were almost used up, so they could only use some inferior talismans. This made it even more convenient for Lu Yi to kill. Taking advantage of this moment of delay, Duan Xiuqian finally caught up to Lu Yi. He swung his fists and enveloped Lu Yi in his fist attacks. He shouted, "You're despicable!" Just now, he thought that Lu Yi wanted to compete with him. Who would have thought that this guy would make a feint and attack his own subordinates? This was too shameless. With Lu Ye's killing speed, if he did not hold him back, it would not be long before he would be alone. Realizing this, Duan Xiuqian naturally did not hold back and went all out. Although he had consumed a lot of spirit energy, it was not to the extent that it would affect the limits of his strength. In the short term, his strength would not fall. However, after exchanging blows, he was shocked to discover that Lu Ye's strength was unexpectedly strong. He faintly felt that he was at a disadvantage. All this time, he had never fought Lu Yi head-on like this. He originally thought that no matter how powerful this guy was, he would at most have the strength of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. However, it seemed that this was not the case at all. After exchanging blows for a while, Duan Xiuqian was forced back by a slash. Lu Yi had no intention of tangling with him and turned to kill another mid-stage constellation realm cultivator. Duan Xiuqian chased after him and shouted, "Don't kill my people anymore." However, just as he shouted this, the mid-stage constellation realm cultivator's blood dyed the void and he was reborn. Lu Yi was not the only one who was reborn, but also the people from the east. However, the greatest advantage of the East was vividly displayed at this moment. After being killed, they could immediately rejoin the battlefield. Therefore, as far as the eye could see, the East's reinforcements seemed to be endless. In the misty space, the 3 tribes had not communicated with each other for a long time. After the East seized the 4th spirit ball, the southern and western tribes' Rizhao seemed to have become mute. He was no longer as relaxed and happy as before. Chen Xianhai and the others did not speak, mainly because no one expected Lu Yi to be so capable. Not only did he seize the 3rd spirit ball, but he also seized the 4th. When they saw the southern and western tribes joining forces to attack, they thought that the East could no longer hold on to their gains. In the end, the southern and western tribes were successfully divided. After that, the western tribes' forces were almost completely wiped out. Yi Chaochuan used the great teleportation talisman to bring the 9 people from the south over. The battle between the southern and eastern tribes' talismans was all under their observation. The situation in the Black Abyss changed unpredictably. Even the knowledgeable Rizhao could not help but gasp in amazement. Until now, it could be clearly seen that the 3 sides were engaged in a chaotic battle. The light spots representing the eastern side were constantly being annihilated, then reappearing, then being annihilated again, then reappearing again. Occasionally, the light spots representing the cultivators of the other 2 sides would dim. Although they were not at the scene, they could imagine the intensity of the battle. The group of people watched with trepidation. Were these little bastards really going all out? Why did it become so tragic? If so, it would be detrimental to the unity of the hominid tribe. In the past Black Abyss martial arts exhibition matches, there seemed to be no such fierce battle. Gradually, the situation became clear, because there was only one light spot representing the southern and western tribes' cultivators left. From the color of the yellow light spot, it should be the southern tribe's late constellation stage. On the east side, relying on Lu Ye's unreasonable hunting as well as his advantage of being able to quickly provide support, he killed the enemy until only Duan Xiuqun was left standing. Until now, his face was still full of resentment, looking at Lu Yi with a complicated expression, and from time to time, words like despicable and shameless would pop out of his mouth. Opposite him, Lu Yi was alone in front, and Hai Tang and the other 8 people behind him, all of them pale. That kind of fierce battle, that kind of rebirth, almost exhausted their strength. It could be said that the people standing behind Lu Yi were as weak as paper. But everyone's expression was very excited, because the situation had reached this point, they really took first place. It was first place that they did not even dare to think about before the martial arts exhibition matches. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.